Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala, ma ba'd. We start off with this tremendous work of Shaykhana, Shaykh Rabi', Hafidhahullah, Ittisam bi Kitab wa Sunnah, Amma ad-Daruri li hadhihi al-Ummah. This adhering to the Kitab and the Sunnah. This is an essential need for this Ummah. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal for His aid in being able to convey the works of this Imam. So after the Shaykh, he starts off with the Khutbah al-Hajah. He then says, "Wa ba'd." And he says, "O my brothers, and O my sons, and O my beloved ones. Indeed, this title is addressed, as you've already heard and have read. That it is the address, as you've already heard and read. The adhering to the book and the Sunnah is a vital need for this Ummah." Then afterwards he said, "By Allah, this is a tremendous affair." He said, "By Allah, this is a tremendous fear. And it's a huge dream." The Shaykh, he says, it's a huge dream. Something that everyone who seeks out good and seeks out happiness for this Ummah is dreaming about. And so he said that it's binding that a person that he sets out, it's binding upon everyone who sets out loving Ummah, loving this religion and loving Islam, and loving that which the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam he came with, wanting for this ummah khair and happiness, goodness and happiness and might and honor and prevalence, and that they be saved from the fire and from the wrath of Allah in this world and the next. There is binding upon them that they set out with serious urgency for this ummah to unify their ranks. Up until this ummah is unified and one. Then he continues, he says, up until that they are being, in reality, in truth, the greatest ummah raised up from the people. Those that enjoying with the good, and they prohibit the evil and they believe in Allah. Based on that verse that we all know. Then he says, "Verily, this is a tremendous affair." And he says that it is binding. This is binding that every Muslim, that they be removed themselves from the sleep that they're in. That they wake up and they remove, and that they wake up everybody that is intending for good for this ummah. And that sleep and that which they are in, that they need to wake up from. And he mentions actually what he's actually speaking about here, the Shaykh. He said the good that we're intending here, or this good that they're intending. After the Shaykh, he says, going back, he says, "Verily, this is a tremendous affair." And he said that it's binding that it be removed and gotten rid of the beds. In other words, that every Muslim needs to wake up. And that everyone that intends good for this ummah, they need to wake up. And then he speaks about that which is in it, from splitting and dividing and separating and being in loss and humiliation and embarrassment in this life. So this is the affair that the people need to wake up from. He said, "La yunkin, it's not possible that the Muslim now that he's resting, whilst he's knowing that which Allah has included in his book from khair, and from the tremendous means, that which will grant them, these Muslims, which will grant us this izzah, this might and this happiness and this prevalence in this world." And then he also talks about, when he says this world, he's talking about the dunya, but then he talks about that which will also grant us might and high stations in the hereafter. And then the Shaykh, he continues And he says that Allah, He has included and He has given all of the means and all of the steps, that which will take this ummah to this uppermost goal, to this noble goal. But as if it is as what the poet says, or as what is mentioned about this ummah, that it is like the white camels in the desert. And this is a tremendous statement Shaykh Rabi mentions. He said it is like the white camels in the desert, that they die, or they're being killed or dying of thirst, whilst they are carrying the water on their back. So ponder over that. He said it is like a camel in the desert that dies from thirst whilst carrying the water on its back. But he then goes on and he says, the Sheikh, that in this Quran is a cure for the sicknesses, for the human sicknesses, all of it. He goes on and he talks about this sickness, and he says that in it is a cure, a beneficial cure, or a healthy beneficial cure for the sickness of the people, whether that be also not just the bodily sicknesses, but he also mentions about the sicknesses in belief, and the sicknesses in mannerisms, and the sicknesses in politics, and the social ills. Then he says, verily by Allah, it is abiding upon this Muslim ummah that they bask in the enjoyment of this Quran and the means of happiness before anything other than it. And that they call all the other nations of this dunya to this tremendous goodness. And then he says, but with great regret, he says that there's been negligence. There's been negligence in taking all of these means of might. So he says that there's been negligence in taking all of these means that would bring about the might. That which, if it was carried out and actualized, going upon the pathways of adhering to the Quran and the Sunnah, and taking these means, that which has been guided, that we've been guided to in the Quran and the Sunnah, then there would come back this dominance. We would find this dominance, and we would find this might, and we would find this happiness in this worldly life. So here the Shaykh, my brothers and sisters, he has mentioned the means of returning back the izzah, and returning back the strength to the Muslims, and returning back the might. And he says that it's with great loss, it's with great regret, that actually we've been negligent in this affair of taking these means that would lead to the khair, lead to the good. And that's by adhering to the Quran and the Sunnah, because within it there's a guidance for everything that we need. And then he mentions this tremendous verse in the Quran. He said, وَابْتَسِمُوا بِحَبِّلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذْ كُنْتُمْ أَعْدَاءً فَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِكُمْ فَأَصْبَحْتُمْ بِنِعْمَتِهِ إِخْوَانًا وَكُنْتُمْ عَلَى شَفَا حُفْرَةٍ مِّنَ النَّارِ فَأَنْقَذَكُم مِّنْهَا كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ آيَاتِهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَهْتَدُونَ وَلْتَكُن مِّنكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ ولا تكونوا كالذين تفرقوا واختلفوا من بعد ما جاءهم البينات وأولئك لهم عذاب عظيم. He mentions this tremendous verse where he said, and hold fast all of you together to the rope of Allah, i.e. this Quran, and be not divided amongst yourselves. And remember Allah's favor upon you, for you were enemies to one another, but He joined your hearts together, so that by His grace you may become brothers. And you were on the brink of the fire, and He saved you from it. Thus Allah makes His verses clear to you, so that you may be guided. And then He says, وَلْتُقُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. Then the Shaykh, he mentions the verse where he says, and let there arise out of you a group of people inviting to all that is good. Inviting to all that is good. And then he says, and they're enjoining that, and they're commanding with the orders of Allah, and prohibiting from that which Allah has prohibited. Those are the successful ones. Those are who are successful. And then he mentions this important part where he says, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ تَفَرَّقُوا, and do not be like those who divided. Do not be like those who divided and differed after the clear proofs had come to them. And then he mentions this tremendous part where he says, where Allah mentions in the Quran where he says, and for those there's an awful torment. So he says, the Sheikh Rabi, he says, and this is directing all of the Muslims to adhere to holding on to the rope of Allah altogether. And do not differ. None of them holding back from it. This is important. And none of them holding back from this commandment and establishing this tremendous affair. And he said that there's no choice in this ever. There's no choice in what? There's no choice in... Huh? Just stopping everyone, making sure you're with me. No choice in what? Holding on firmly to this rope of Allah. This commandment of holding on firm to the rope of Allah, there's no choice in it. There's no choice in it. So he said there's no choice in it. In that a person that he now takes it or he decides that he's going to leave it. This is a command that is obligatory, is binding upon everybody that attributes themselves to this religion. Everyone that attributes themselves to this great religion of Al-Islam. That which Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he came with, that they have this sanctity for the book of Allah. And they have this respect and this awe for the book of Allah. That which no falsehood can come to it from behind nor in front. Or in front nor from behind. And that they adhere to all of them. None of them they're holding back and saying, I'm not going to hold on to it. And this is actualizing this affair. And actualizing this goal. And then the Shaykh, he says, with that, yani, there will be as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said about them, كَالْبُنْيَانِ يَشُدُّ بَعْضُهُمْ بَعْضٍ, or يَشُدُّ بَعْضُهُ بَعْضٍ. He said they will become like a brick wall. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said they will become like a brick wall. Some parts strengthening other parts. And that hadith is mentioned in Sahih Bukhari. And he said with that, it will be achieved and bring about that unity and that brotherhood and strengthen the bonds and the harmony and the love. And it will bring a cease to all the different types, all of the different means of splitting and differing and separating. And then he mentioned some of those things. From having hatred, from having jealousy, and all of the different means of separating, all the dislike and hatred, and all that dislike and hatred that he brings about, up until the end of the evil means, and the evil and the means that bring about hatred and the dislike actions. That which all that Islam it warns against, and is free from and flees from. And then he says, then we will find the strength of bonds. We'll find thereafter the strength of bonds and love and the means of goodness and the means of strength and the means of might. When what? When will we find that? He says when we, all of us, adhere to holding on to that rope of Allah. Brothers, we have to ponder over it because it's not just a case of just reading. And we ask Allah for his aid. That this ayah is powerful. That the Shaykh is saying here that if we adhere to all of us holding on to the rope of Allah, then all of those that set out for good, he mentioned right at the beginning of it, will come to us. Every single person, we're all dreaming of that unity. We're all dreaming that the Ummah can be together. We're all dreaming that the strength and the might and that which came to those virtuous generations will all come back. How is that achieved, the Shaykh is saying? He's saying by holding on to the rope of Allah. This is something that is important. And then the Shaykh, he says, look in these verses, how Allah, he gathered in it that which will bring about our happiness in this life and the next. He said, by Allah, that if we was to really ponder over these verses, that which we recite it, yeah, it would resolve. Yeah, it would. Sorry, if we was to carry it out, and we would have that resolve upon acting upon it, and that what it includes from the commandments, and that which it is leading us to do from good, and that which it is guiding us to do from the means that will bring about might, and that which it clarifies and explains to us the means, that which it clarifies and makes clear to us what it can lead to. So it clarifies to us what it can lead to from the means of anger of Allah and from having the wrath and the curse of Allah. If we were to only truly understand this, then, and we acted upon this good, then surely it would come to us. It would come to us, this goodness, and we'll be far and distance away from all of the evil. And we'll be able to achieve that which those virtuous generations, they achieved. Why? Because they are the ones that they made this book, that which led them. They made this book something that was mighty to them. And due to that, they became the teachers of the dunya. And they became the leaders of the dunya. And they had this sovereign over it. All due to what, my brothers and sisters? All due to what? Clinging on to this Quran. And then the Shaykh, he goes on and he says, actualizing this great goal and having these bonds between the hearts, and that is what this great goal is. He says that to actualize this great goal and to bring about, and it is, where he says, well, it is that you bring about the bondships, that you connect the hearts, and the brotherhood between the believers. And then he mentioned the verse where he said, لو أنفقت ما في الأرض جميعا ما ألفت بين قلوبهم. And he said that if you were to spend all that is in the earth, you could not have united their hearts. And so the Shaykh, he continues on and he says that Allah, He joined the hearts together. He joined the hearts together with this tremendous Quran. So when they understood it, and when they clinged onto it, and its tenets, and its foundations, and its principles, and its clarifications, after that, they understood it, and they gave it the right it deserved. Then after they adhered to it, and they bit onto it and held onto it with their molar teeth, and they knew the evilness also of what would come about from the splitting. And so for that reason, they got rid of all of those means completely. And even after that, they became brothers, as it was mentioned in the verse. So ponder that over that, my brothers and sisters. What the Shaykh is saying. He's saying that due to them holding on to this rope of Allah, due to them biting onto it, holding on to its tenets, holding on to its foundations, holding on to its principles, holding on to all that which it guides to and clarifies, and they gave it the right it deserved, and adhered to it and bit onto it their molar teeth, that is the means that brought about their brotherhood. And they also knew the evil effects and the evil of splitting. And then he mentioned the verse, إِذْ كُنْتُمْ أَعْدَاءً فَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِكُمْ فَأَصْبَحْتُمْ بِنِعْمَتِهِ إِخْوَانًا. And he says, when you were enemies to one another, then Allah, He done what? He joined between your hearts, so that thereby you became, by His blessing and by His favor, brothers. And then he said, وَكُنْتُمْ عَلَى شَفَا حُفْرَةٍ مِّنَ النَّارِ فَأَنْقَذَكُمْ مِنْهَا. And he said, you were on the brink of the fire, and He saved you from it. كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ آيَاتِهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَهْتَدُونَ. And then he says, and it's that he says, and He saved you from it. كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. And thereby Allah, He explains to you His verses, so that you may become from those who are guided. Then the Shaykh, he goes on and he tells a tremendous story. He said that there was a time that he was in a lesson in Masjid al-Nabawi, he said. And he says that in front of him was a people from the Rawafida, or the Rawafid. And he said that Allah, he put something into his mind. He said that he was able to see something, or he was able to see them. And then he said, this ayah that we just mentioned, and it's proof that the companions, they had been brothers. And that Allah had saved them from the fire. And that they had been upon the utmost goal, or upon the utmost of love and brotherhood. And that Allah, He bear witness to them, for them, and that He saved them from the fire. And then he repeated the ayah, the Shaykh, وَكُنْتُمْ عَلَى شَفَاءِ حُفْرَةٍ مِّنَ النَّارِ فَأَنْقَذَكُم مِّنْهَا كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ آيَاتِهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَهْتَدُونَ. And then he says afterwards, he mentioned this verse again, that they had been on the brink of the hellfire, and Allah, He saved them from it. And that Allah, He explains to you His verses, His proofs, so that you may be guided. So ponder over that, because the Rafida will now come and he will make takfir. He will make takfir of some of the Sahaba. Yes, he will make takfir of some of the Sahaba. Say some of the Sahaba are not believers, or not Muslims. And so this verse actually is a refutation of them, because it says, Allah testifies that actually that they became brothers. That they became what? They became brothers. And so what can be taken from this is that the Sahaba, they understood the Quran, the Shaykh says. They understood this guidance. And they had been, may Allah be pleased with them, upon the utmost of happiness. And they had the might and the happiness, it mentions here. And they conquered the whole dunya, it mentions. They conquered the whole world with what? With this Quran. And they overthrew the palaces and the kings of Rome and Persia. And at that same, we must ponder that the Shaykh, he says there, at the same time, there had been little in number and little in preparation and having that material that would aid them. And he said that their enemies, on the other hand, they had been at their peak and at the utmost of strength. And they had been plentiful in number. And there had been no comparison in reality. And that what they had in terms of numbers, and that which they had in terms of preparation. There was no comparison between that which was in the hands of the Muslims and that which was in their hands. But with that, in a couple of years, in a small amount of years I should say, they conquered the whole dunya. And had the flags of Tawheed and the Quran waving in some of the greatest parts of the world. In a short period of time, the Shaykh, he says. The Shaykh asks an important question. He says, كيف هذا? Yani, how was this? This is the reason why he's mentioning this point. How was this, my brothers and sisters? How was it that they conquered the whole world in this short period of time? How is it that they achieved this? What was the means? And then he goes on and he says that they were given, and it was preceded them every khair, every goodness for this ummah. And they actualized all that would lead to spreading this goodness and spreading this religion, it mentions. And then it says that they conquered the hearts before they conquered the lands. That's an important point, as we're going back to the lesson that we had last week about safeguarding the hearts. That the companions, because remember, as Salafis, we are trying to be upon what they were upon. We're trying to be upon what they were upon. And they conquered the hearts before they conquered the lands, the Shaykh said. And he says all of that is due to their understanding. And that they're shiddah, they're strongly adhering to this book. Because they realize that to gain this leadership, to gain this sovereign in this world, it would have to be done with this Quran. And that they would have to rule with this Quran and with this book. And they also believed, it mentions here, with the promise of Allah. And so the Shaykh mentioned the verse, هُوَ الَّذِي أَرْسَلَ رَسُولُهُ بِالْهُدَى وَدِينِ الْحَقِّ لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ. Where he mentions that, where he says, and it was he who sent the messenger with the guidance. He sent him with the guidance and the religion and the superior, and to make the religion superior upon all of the other religions, even if it's that the polytheists may hate it. And where he mentioned in the Quran, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. And he said that we did not send you except as a mercy to all that exists. So they, the companions, they pursued the mercy for the creation. And that they dragged and pulled the people by chains to paradise. Dragging and pulling the people to paradise, the Shaykh says, may Allah be pleased with them. And they spread this mercy of Allah and spread this khair, they spread this goodness. And they let this Quran be what led them. And so they became, actually, he says that they became the leaders due to this Quran, and the leaders and the leaders. Now, so they said that, and they led this Quran, and they made the utmost the Arabic language. So he said, who could be better in the Arabic language than the Sahaba? And he said this was all due, or this was all done with their sidq, their truthfulness and their sincerity. And due to that, they conquered the world. And so they taught the whole dunya the Arabic language, and taught them the Quran. And they produced fuqaha in a short period of time. And the ulama, the scholars, they were racing. Rather, they excelled some of the greatest of the fuqaha of the Arabs. So the Shaykh, something that we must all ponder over, my brothers and sisters, myself first and foremost, is that what was the means? The Shaykh, he says, the means was their sincerity and their what? Their truthfulness in carrying this religion, seeking might by the way of it and adhering to it. And then they strove in everything that they possessed with their strength in spreading and making it reach the hearts. And they conquered with it the hearts before the lands and the nations it mentions. Now, and then he goes on and he says, well now, he says, as for now, the enemies of Islam, they wage war against us with all that they are able from their might that they have. And then he says, and this is in the midst of our own lands. And he says, we have now become systems with all that the other enemies they fill us with. And then he says, but we have with us, and وَمَا كَانَ عِنْدَنَا Quran, and there's not with us the Quran. As if there's not with us the Quran. And as if that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he didn't leave us with the message. As if that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he did not leave us on a clear plain. Its night is like its day. No one goes astray from it, or no one misguides themselves from it, except that they're destroyed. It's as if like we are a barbaric and uncivilized nation. And then he continues to say, the Shaykh, as if that we do not have with us the tenets, and nor is there with us any foundations, and nor is there with us the beliefs, the belief system. It's as if that we are void of all of these values, the Shaykh, he says, and all of these tenets with great regret. And so the affair has now flipped upside down, he says, and the positions have changed. And his head has now become his bottom. And so it's become, as it is said, that is now us that used to be able to teach our aqidah to the people and instruct the people. But now, like our Salaf used to do. So he says, So the affair has now changed. So that's how it used to be in the time of the Salaf. In the time of the Salaf, they would instruct. They would be the ones that would tell the people what the beliefs were. But everything has changed now. And then it says, even though that we have with us the means and the great availability to spread this deen, even though we have it, even though now that the whole world, the Shaykh has said, has become like it is as if one city. But he says even then, we are unable to spread this religion. And then the Shaykh, so actually, after he said, the Shaykh, and he said, if we are unable to spread this religion, the Shaykh, he says, by the means of the safe, behind the Muslim rulers. So the Muslim rulers are the ones that declare wars. So if behind the Muslim rulers, the likes like the rulers of Saudi Arabia or the rulers of Morocco, the rulers of Pakistan, for example, they are the ones that can declare war. It's important to mention that point, that they're the ones that can declare the war. Not like ISIS and Daesh and Boko Haram and them lot, and the Shabab. These Muslim rulers, he says, even though we're unable to maybe establish the religion behind these Muslim rulers, behind their armies, then he's saying, at least he says, كَمَا قَدَرَ عَلَى ذَلِكَ أَسْلَافُنَا, like our Salaf were able to do. So if we're unable to do this, at the bare minimum, the Shaykh is saying, let us at least be the means, let's spread this means, spread this dawah, spread this religion through mass media. And make use of it and exploit it, he says, in spreading the religion. And getting this media information out there. Yes, in the papers, in the radio, and other than it, and other than it, and other than it. Whether it be in authorships, whether it be in broadcasting, whether it be in khutb, if it be in the sermons, to the end of it. He said at the bare minimal, let's not use these services in spreading the religion of Allah. And in gathering the Muslims upon Tawheed, and upon the truth, and upon the kalima, and upon khair. But he said with great regrets, and he is as he mentioned in the verse, وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا فَتَفْشَلُوا وَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ. He says, and do not dispute, Allah, he says in the Quran, and lose your courage, and thereby your strength will go. So he says, due to this disputing, he says, the means of differing has come about. And the means of separating and splitting. That which has come about and that which is prevalent now between the Muslims. Now, he says, and due to that now, what has happened? The loss of courage has come about in an instant. That which Allah, he said, would take place. And no doubt that it would take place. And no doubt the separation would take place. And then he said, وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا فَتَفْشَلُوا وَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ. He said, and do not dispute and lose your courage and lose your strength. And then your strength will go. So the Shaykh, he said that your strength will go. So now he says, it has become that we are the weakest of the people. And we have the humiliation now that we have now become a humiliated people. And he said, the Shaykh, in reality, we're deserving of that. All of that has come to us from Allah. This lowliness and this embarrassment, and that we have been overcome and embarrassed by the other nations. And then he says, all of that is because of our negligence in this great amount of khair that we have. That which is binding upon us, he says, and that we should not spare any effort. We should not spare any effort in spreading it. And that we should strive hard, desperately, in trying to make it reach all of the other nations. After that, we have filled our own souls and our own minds. And we have made it prevalent, this khair, in our societies. So I'll stop now and just try to gather again what the Shaykh is saying. That the Shaykh is saying that we have got the means, we have got much ability to spread the khair. Whether that be on media, whether that be authorships, whether that be broadcasts, whether that be sermons. But due to us differing and due to us disputing and bringing about this differing, now what Allah said will happen has happened. That the strength of the Muslim has gone. And so now he's mentioning that this is what Allah said was going to happen, and it's happened. And so he said that it is binding upon us now. And we should not stop. We should strive with all of our effort now to spread this. strive hard desperately in spreading this to all of the other nations after we have filled it up our own souls and our own minds to make it prevalent over the other people. And then the Sheikh, he says, but with much sorrow, this splitting has weakened our beliefs and weakened our resolve, and it has split the bondship and has caused splits between the Muslims. So he says, and it has split the bondships, that which was tied together between the Muslims, and it comprises of strength from them. So he says, the Sheikh, so the Sheikh, he said, and this splitting has weakened the belief systems and weakened the resolves and has caused the bondship to be split. These bonds that used to be strong between the Muslims and used to comprise of strength. And then he said this type of strength that was there, it was not possible. There was not a strength on the face of the earth that could stand in its face whenever that it was being held onto, and that the people were unified upon this book, unified upon the Quran. Then he says, but due to the splitting or the differing, he said, and the many callers, they only increased in differing due to their, he says, and they started, but due to their splitting and due to their differing, it did not increase them accepting in this expanding of this being ununited. And then he says, and this was then there was many callers, and this only increased them in differing, and that was due to them all wanting to follow their desires, follow their desires of what they were following, or all the different types of misguidance, or all the different things that would lead to splitting. And they would actually come out and say they would actually rather empower and deepen in this splitting. And they would pretend and claim that actually that there's no doubt this must happen. This splitting must happen. And we find this in our own communities. Myself, in my own community, you find this. You find that a person will say, I have my Pakistani masjid and you have your Bengali masjid. And there's no way that we can come together. This is impossible. Even on the way on the car here, a brother said, in his country, a person said, this is our Turkish masjid. And that is their Moroccan masjid. And there's no way that we can come together. So as the Sheikh is saying, you will find a person claiming that, no, this is just the way it is. They are like this and we are like that, and there's no way we can come together. As if there's no solution. As if that Allah did not give us a solution. And so the Sheikh continues and he says, and this is basically in opposite of what we say to the Muslims. We say that there's a great need actually to gather the Muslims all together and to discard all of this differing and all of that, yani. And he said all of that, it can only be completed when that there is truthfulness and there's sincerity and there's desire and longing in gathering the Muslims upon the kalima. Because Allah, he said in the Quran, فَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ فَرُدُّوهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ إِن كُنتُمْ تُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ وَأَحْسَنُ تَأْوِيلًا. And he said that if they differ in anything, then return it back to Allah and His Messenger. Indeed, if you believe in Allah and the last day, that is better and more suitable as a final destination. So he says, by Allah, have you heard a serious attempt from these people to actually actualize this, to actually actualize the returning back to the Quran and the Sunnah, and that letting Allah be the one that is and Allah and His Messenger be the one that rules in their decisions, in their differing? Have you actually heard serious attempts of establishing this great legislation? And it is that we let decide and we let that which rule over our problems and our differing, the book of Allah and Sunnah of the Messenger. And so he says, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he says, this is what is sought after. It's sought after the unity of the Muslims. And he said that no doubt that this requires sincerity in this ummah. Naam, this ummah Islamiyah. and that we should strive and pursue to actualize this. Then the Shaykh, he says, but have you seriously heard these attempts, to undo the differing and terminate and solve the problems and bring an end to the differing? Have you ever heard of a conference titled, meaning obviously other than the Salafis, have you heard of the title, ending of the differing between the Muslims and letting the book of Allah and the Sunnah rule over and be the deciding factor in the differing and the splitting of the Ummah? Now this has not happened. This has not happened. Rather, we find actually enthusiasm and raghbah in actually, from many of the callers, in actually remaining upon their differing and deepening this differing and persuading and trying to convince others, those that crave, and persuade and contraring others from those that actually want to, that crave and desire to gather the Muslims, set and prepare them for this serious, Afwan, he says, rather, we do not find this, he says, we do not find this from many of the callers. Rather, we find them in remaining upon this differing and deepening this differing and trying to persuade and convince everybody that is trying to crave to gather the Muslims together and having that serious to do so. Trying to convince them to come to their way, basically. And they said about them, they say that actually splitting is something that is a must. And so he said, we do not find this type of speech in the book of Allah, nor do we find it with the companions. The companions, they used to what? They used to strive to end their difference between them. It was never a case except that you would find Umar that he would give any type of room to differing, that which came about between the Muslims ever. Rather, he would threaten them with hitting them. Or, he says here, yes, you'll find him threatening them with hitting them. Anybody that would try to bring about any type of dispute and bring about any type of difference. Even in the types of subsidiary, the branches of the religion, let alone in the foundation. And then he mentions a beautiful story where he said that a man, he came to Umar and he said, وَالذَّارِيَاتِ ذَرْوَةً. He says, what does this mean? This verse, what does it mean by the phenomenon of the winds that scatter the dust? He said, what does this mean? And so he said, Sheikh Rabi, he was trying to throw some sort of doubt upon the Muslims. So he said, Umar, he hit him. He said, he hit him, severely hit him. And he said, not only did he hit him, he imprisoned him. Then he hit him again and imprisoned him. Then he hit him a third time, then imprisoned him. Up until in the conclusion, this person was expelled. And the Muslims were commanded with boycotting him and distancing themselves from him. And so he says, we find in this Quran this warning from this difference in these verses that we recited. And so here he mentions two places where he says this. وَاتَّسِمُوا بِحَبِلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold on, all of you, to the rope of Allah together and do not divide. وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذْ كُنْتُمْ أَعْدَاءً فَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِكُمْ فَأَصْبَحْتُمْ بِنِعْمَتِهِ إِخْوَانًا. And then he says, Allah in the Quran, and mention the favor of Allah upon you when you were enemies to one another. And you had, and Allah had, you were enemies to one another. And Allah, He joined your hearts together. So thereby, by His favor, you became brothers. وَكُنْتُمْ عَلَىٰ شَفَاعَ حُفَّةٍ مِّنَ النَّارِ فَأَنْقَذَكُمْ مِنْهَا. And he said that you had been upon the brink of the fire and He saved you from it. So the first place where he says this is where he says, وَلَا تَفَرُّقُوا, and do not differ. And in the next place he says, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ تَفَرُّقُوا وَاخْتَلَفُوا. He said, and do not be like those who they divided and they differed. So Shaykh Rabi', he says, ponder over this warning. He says, ponder, is this a warning or not? Are these not two warnings in one page? So he says, in between these ayahs of 3 or 4 ayat, you have two warnings. Yani a severe warning and an explanation of what is the consequence of this splitting. And then he mentions وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا فَتَفْشَلُوا وَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ. And he says, do not dispute, so that you end up losing courage and it goes from you your strength. And then he mentions, and then the Shaykh, he mentions after that, he says, وَمَا اخْتَلَفْتُمْ فِيهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. And in whatever you differ in Allah, he says, so the Shaykh, he says, is this empowering differing here? Where Allah, he says, and whatever you differ in. He says, is this empowering differing? That every single one should make excuses for his brother and allow the differing to occur? And that differing is a need, a must? And he says, no, Allah, he says in the Quran, he says, فَحُكْمُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ. The decision thereof is with Allah. So he says in the Quran, فَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ. So if you dispute in anything. So what should you do? The Shaykh, he says, so what should you do? Is it a case that if we differ in something, you and your brother differ in something, is it a case that every single one should remain firm in his place, remain firm upon what he's upon? That every single one, he deepens into his side of the differing that is present between the Ummah today? He said, or is it a case that a person, they must rectify that which is bringing about these desires and rectify the division and gather those that have split. And then he mentions, how is this done? This is done by ruling by the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he goes on to mention that by ruling by the Book of Allah and ruling by the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's how it is done, by ruling by the Book of Allah and ruling by the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, in this great affair, in this great affair, you will find many of the Muslims, they're ignorant of it. And they don't give consideration to this way of gathering the people, or gathering the Muslims. And they become despondent. Rather, you find that they have now authored authorships that now encourage the splitting of the Muslims and encouraging the splitting and the differing between the Muslims. So he said, who from the Sahaba would author an authorship, a book that would bring a greater division between the Muslims? And then he said that Hudayfa, when he had heard some of the reciters and those that recite differing in the book, in their reading of the Quran, it says, he became very angry. And my brother, this was one of the best things that I read in this small lecture that the Sheikh, he delivered. And if there's one thing that will really hit home the compassion and the love the Sahaba had in keeping the Muslims together, is this, where he mentioned that Hudayfa, when he heard that some of the reciters were splitting and were differing with each other in their recitation of the Quran, he became angry. And so he said that he came to Uthman when he heard about this splitting or this differing between the reciters. And so he says, every single group, thought that what they had, or their recitation of their ballad or their country, was what was right, or what was best. And that it was the truth. He said, because the Quran, he says, to Shaykh Rabi', he says that the Quran, it was revealed upon 7 dialects. But they said, but when it was then found disputing in that which was better and greater from them, every single one believing that what was with them was greater, the Shaykh, he said, then this was the means of splitting. And so he hastened. Listen to what Hudayfa did, radiyallahu anhu. He hastened to Uthman. He hastened to him. He mentioned from the corner of Iraq. Imagine, my brothers, he rushed from the corner of Iraq to Medina, striking his camel with his whip. All the way to the Khalifa, all the way to this rightly guided Khalifa Uthman. All to do what? To fix this problem of the Ummah. Before that any type of division, before any type of splitting and differing could occur. Like like what occurred with the people of the book before. And so after that, it mentioned that he set out Uthman with a seriousness to gather the Quran, all of it, upon the dialect of the Quraysh, up until it could end all of this differing. So ponder over this, my brother and my sisters, that when we have problems between ourselves, how far are we willing to go to solve these problems? Ponder. Here's this companion, not by train, not by plane, not by car. He's on a camel, riding from Iraq to Medina to solve a problem, to stop splitting, to stop differing. How far are we willing to go? If we differ with our brother, how far are we willing to go to bring an end to that? And then he said that Uthman, he appointed a group of people to gather the Quran. And then he mentioned from them was Sayyid ibn Thabit, wa Abdullah ibn Zubair, and Sa'id ibn As, wa Abdul Rahman ibn Harith ibn Hisham. May Allah be pleased with all of them. And so he was said to them, or he said to them, Uthman, that if you differ in anything, then you should go back to the dialect of the Quraysh, because the Quran was revealed in that dialect. And he said it was revealed in that dialect. And then the Shaykh goes on, and the Quran was revealed upon 7 dialects. But when it was feared that there will be some sort of differing, it was gathered. Or they gathered it upon one dialect, so that it could end all of that differing. And so it goes on, and he said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he warned against differing. He warned against it, and he dispraised it. And he said, and it was a threat upon differing and upon splitting. He said there is no empowering or making it, or there's no empowering of the different ever. Not in the Quran, or not in the Sunnah, and not from the Sahaba, may Allah be pleased with them all. So he said this is the position and the stance of the Sahaba, may Allah be pleased with all of them. So he said, I mentioned to you before the stance of Ummah. He said that when he wanted this person to come and then see the sword of separation, he hit him and imprisoned him. Exiled him. And then he ordered the Muslims to boycott him, up until he repented and his brain was then free of all of these doubts that he had. That if his person was allowed to, if he was able to, then he would have sowed an evil seed of splitting amongst the Muslims. So all of that was done by Umar. Why? Why did Umar do that? May Allah be pleased with him. All of that was to stop the splitting, to stop the differing between the Muslims to happen. And then he mentioned, Sheikh Rabi', that Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, she said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he recited, هو الذي أنزل عليك الكتاب منه آيات محكمات هن أم الكتاب وأخر متشابهات فأما الذين في قلوبهم زيغ فيتبعون ما تشابه منه ابتغاء الفتنة وابتغاء تأويله وما يعلم تأويله إلا الله.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
نعم. We'll start to summarize, inshallah, some of that which the Sheikh has mentioned in this tremendous work. And from it, my brothers and sisters, is that we must have sidq, truthfulness and ikhlas, sincerity in trying to spread this religion. And the Sheikh, he mentioned previously about the severe threat for the one that brings about this splitting. Where he says, وَأُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ, and for them is an awful torment. If he hasn't said it's coming. And he also mentions that there's a solution to the problems. And I say this for myself first and foremost, that my brothers and sisters, that if there's any difference that occurs upon us, it's upon us to do as it mentions here, to hold on to that rope of Allah, and to go back to the Quran, and to go back to the Sunnah, and try not to bring anything that will bring about disputes and differing. Because as it's mentioned, then it will go, and it will be lost our courage, and it will be lost our strength. And so that is something that is binding upon myself first and foremost, and all of us, that we must all strive. And that's one of the main things that I took from this. It's important that we strive with our utmost to keep the bond of Salafiyya together upon the Quran, upon the Sunnah, upon the understanding of the Salaf. And it's for this reason why Hudayfa, may Allah be pleased with him, he rode his camel at speed. Not because anybody was even wrong. Everybody had a right that actually my dialect, this is how it was revealed. My dialect, that's how it was revealed. But the fact that he saw that some people were saying our one is better than yours, and that it was going to bring about differing, then for that the Sheikh, he mentioned that he rode his camel from Iraq to Medina to solve this problem and to bring the issue to Uthman. May Allah be pleased with him. And also he mentioned the story of Umar and how he beat and imprisoned and exiled a person and had him boycotted due to him trying to bring about doubts. All of that again, trying to keep the unity between the Muslims. So for us, it is upon us to, as a conclusion, to gather upon the Quran and the Sunnah, upon the understanding of the Salaf, and to call the people to it, and to invite the people to it, and to remain firm, all of us holding on to that rope of Allah. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal for first and foremost to forgive me if there was any shortcomings in trying to get across what our Sheikh Rabi' said. We ask him that he accepts any little good that we do. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal that he strengthens our bonds of brotherhood between us, and that he makes us the greatest of nations that came out from mankind, as is mentioned in the verse, makes us from those that hold on to the rope of Allah. Inshallah, we'll end it here, inshallah. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.